All right, Jesse, long time no see.
Yeah.
So, last time we really dug into your experience, like when you were at the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate your candor and your honesty and your willingness to go to that place, because I know that must have been really difficult for you. I do remember when you were diagnosed, the doctors were very adamant that it was non-alcoholic liver failure. But I know that we've discussed in the past that there was a period of your life where you did drink pretty heavily, and there was a lot of fear involved of, hey, maybe that drinking did have something to do with the liver failure. Now, the doctors have been very adamant time and time again that it didn't, but I guess I was wondering if you would be interested in kind of diving into your experience of when you were drinking really heavily.
Yeah, so a few things with that. The original diagnosis was non-alcoholic liver disease. But despite the original diagnosis being non-alcoholic liver disease, it's the opposite. Many doctors considered me an alcoholic. Yeah, they just said it's alcoholic liver disease.
Oh, wow.
Even though it's in the records that it was non-alcoholic liver disease that was diagnosed. I think if you get liver failure, they automatically assume
that's like what they're going to jump to, right? Yeah.
Because it's the number one cause.
It's like if you get diagnosed with lung cancer, they probably think you smoke cigarettes.
Correct.
Yeah.
So they're going to treat you that way.
Yeah.
So I got diagnosed with non-alcoholic liver disease, but yeah. And I didn't drink kind of heavy. I drank extremely heavy. There was a couple events that had taken place in my life. When I was growing up, my dad was addicted to pills. And I didn't even know what Percocet was until I got my wisdom teeth pulled.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave it to me. And then it clicked what my dad was on. And I didn't have an issue with it when I got my wisdom teeth pulled. I did have an issue with it later in life. I got in a really big car accident when I was 19, and somebody hit me going 70 miles an hour when I was stopped. It was on I-5 in Tacoma. I was driving up here from Arizona, had everything I owned in the back of my truck. Drove 20 hours straight from Bullhead City, Arizona, all the way to Tacoma, and I was about 45 minutes from home, and then it was dumping rain. What I saw ahead of me was a bunch of brake lights turn on. It was almost midnight and it was dumping rain. So the car in front of me slammed on his brakes, I slammed on my brakes, stopped just in time to look in my rear view and see that the guy behind me didn't see we're stopped, and he hit me full speed. He hit me so hard my CD player snapped out of my dashboard and landed on the seat next to me.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, like my truck bed, it's about that deep. It was about that deep. He hit me so hard his hood went through his windshield. And him and his girlfriend, I'm assuming, were pulled out bloody on stretchers. Thank God I walked away from that. But after 10 years, the long-term effects started sinking in. Because it twisted my spine 43 degrees one way and 37 degrees the other way.
Mm-hmm.
So just...
Yeah, so they're like facing opposite directions, like the top and the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I went to a chiropractor 4 days a week for 9 months to straighten it back out. And it was a temporary solution. Mm-hmm. And then by the time I reached 30 years old, I was walking with a cane and my legs hurt so bad. Have you ever gotten a Charlie horse?
Yeah.
It felt like a Charlie horse from my belly button down to my toes.
Oh my gosh. 24
hours a day. So that was when the doctors put me on pain meds, and insurance unfortunately makes you jump through a bunch of hoops before they'll approve surgery. So they had me on pain meds for over a year before they approved spine surgery. And then after the spine surgery, the doctor put me on 12 30 milligram Percocets a day.
Really?
One every 2 hours.
Wow.
I don't know if you know what Percocet is.
I'm familiar.
Or how strong it is, but 30 milligrams is intense.
A lot.
It's a lot. And every 2 hours
is a lot.
Is a lot. And I was on muscle relaxers at the same time. For the first week after surgery, my ex would wake me up.
You were in La La Land.
Yeah, she'd wake me up and be like, you have to take your meds. I'd take them and go right back to sleep. I was asleep for a week, basically. So I got addicted to, obviously, got addicted to painkillers. I was on them for, I think, about 4 months. He did lower the dose after about 6 weeks to 15 milligrams a day. And then after a few months, I said, I don't want to be on these anymore. So he sent me to another doctor who put me on Suboxone.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fine. But at the same time, another event had happened in my marriage that I don't want to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
That caused me significant emotional pain. And I guess once I was on the pain meds, that emotional pain was numb.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they took me off of the pain meds, I was too weak to deal with the emotions. So I started drinking. I drank, socially up until that point.
Mm-hmm.
But then I started drinking more and more and more. I don't know if this is true, but for me, it felt like when you're on Suboxone, you don't really feel the effects of alcohol either.
Hmm.
So I would start, I drink 5, 6, 7 shots and I wouldn't feel anything. And I just felt like, oh, mentally I'm numbing myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then over the course of, 6 months, that 5, 6, 7 shots a day went all the way up to over a half of a gallon of hard liquor every other day, even more than that. Because when you drink that much, you get the shakes if you don't have alcohol in your system. So
You became physically dependent on it.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it wasn't about getting drunk or feeling the buzz anymore. It was about
not getting sick.
Yeah. So I continued drinking that heavy for about 1.5 years. And then it was at that point that my ex told me to go to rehab. And I did. And I graduated rehab, and it's been fine ever since.
What was your experience in rehab like?
To be honest, I felt like I didn't really belong there. I felt like, yes, I needed help getting off of the alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
But once I was sober, I felt like I was fine, which I'm sure everybody does at rehab. I don't think I'm special in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not somebody who judges people. So I just spent that 3 weeks, I felt bad for a lot of the people there in the situations they were in. I remember there was a guy that his whole family, they were crack dealers or something, and they expected him to start doing crack and selling crack as like a 12-year-old. And he did. And he was in rehab because he didn't want to be that way anymore. And his teeth, he was like, 23, 24 years old. His teeth were so bad that the rehab sent him to a dentist, and they pulled out all his teeth in one day.
Oh my gosh.
And he came back the next day and he didn't have any
all
teeth.
Gums.
Yeah. And he was the nicest guy in the world. I hope he's doing good. But when you're there with people like that, one guy said, the meanest thing he did to his wife to scare her was he actually stabbed himself in the stomach with a knife, saying, if you leave me, I'll kill myself. And he had a major scar on his stomach. And I'm like, I don't belong here.
Mm. Yeah,
But,
so you're sitting there looking around and hearing like how intense these stories are, and
Yeah.
they feel many degrees higher than anything that you had necessarily gone through. Not to minimize your own experience, right? Because it sounds very clearly like an event happened that was traumatic for you, and little did you know the pain medication that you were on was helping mask that pain, that emotional pain, right? And then once once you were being taken off of those, not only were you feeling your emotions again, right, and feeling the emotional pain of that traumatic event, but all of that time you had been masking it, you accumulated emotional debt. So you were not only dealing with the emotions in the moment, you were forced to deal with the emotions that had been masked for months and months and months. And so you turned to alcohol to cope with it, right? And that is very normal, right? A lot of times we talk about coping in very positive ways, right? Of like exercising and diet and doing art and for you specifically like playing music, right? But like there's a reason why people drink. There's a reason why people take opioids. There's a reason why people do all sorts of harmful things for themselves, because that's the way for them to cope, right?
Correct. Self-medicating.
Yep, 100%.
Yep. So after I got out of rehab, I wasn't at rehab by court order. I didn't get in trouble with the law at all. I did it strictly to attempt to save my marriage and to show how willing I was to stay sober. Voluntarily, I went to a year of intensive outpatient rehab, basically. Voluntarily. It cost me like $7,200 out of pocket. 3 nights a week for 2 hours.
It's quite a lot to commit to, right?
Yeah, and I
dedicated to.
Correct, and I did that even after my divorce was started. I continued to go.
Why did you continue to go?
I found it interesting. You get to know a lot of cool people in those places, and they become friends. And I guess part of me thought that if I continued to do this, maybe she'll change her mind, and we won't break up. And I learned a lot, you know. In a way, it was like college for alcoholics, I guess.
That makes
sense. So I learned a lot. And like one of the coolest things that the counselor said that really stuck with me was, you know, about 10% of people have that alcoholic addict gene.
And there is a gene.
Yeah. And so, you know, we have 350 million people in the US. That's 35 million people that have that gene to become an addict or an alcoholic. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to become one, but basically what he said is in their brains it's like a flip switch, and every time you drink or do drugs, you're flicking at it. And you might be fine. You know, a lot of people experiment in college and they end up being fine. But every time you drink, you're playing with that until one day the light switch turns on, and then it becomes no longer, hey, I want to have a drink. It's, I need a drink. And then it's on for the rest of your life. So you're going to have that urge all day, every day for the rest of your life once that switch turns on, if you have that addict gene. That's why I thought I was different, because
you didn't identify with that.
Correct. I didn't have that need anymore. And I could be lying to myself, I don't know. But yeah, so referring that back to the hospital.
And there is an aspect, if I can interrupt for just a second, like if 10% of the population has that gene to be predisposed to addiction and have that switch that gets flipped, that doesn't mean that the other 90% can't be addicts.
Correct.
Or can't be alcoholics. They certainly can still abuse drugs.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Right. It's not one or the other, right? So it sounds to me like what you're saying is like you feel like you do fall into that 90% category where that switch for you didn't get flipped, where you're not sitting craving drinking every single day for the rest of your life, right? Where you had a traumatic event, several traumatic events in your life, right? And drinking was an outlet for you to be able to cope. And then once you got the help that, self-admittedly that you needed by going to rehab and IOP and you got that under control, well, hey, like that switch for you wasn't there. That switch for you hadn't been flipped.
Yeah.
Right? You
Yeah.
were abusing alcohol at one point, but that doesn't mean that that's the way it was going to be forever.
Correct. And I feel like learning everything that I learned about it, even if, you know, whether you're an alcoholic or you're not an alcoholic, that knowledge just helps you understand why drinking's not a great thing. You know, so
knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power, and you can come up with other hobbies. So, you know, I don't like to play with fire anyway, just in case, you know. But so when I got to the hospital in 2020, when my mom found me face down in the bed and I had hepatic encephalopathy, didn't know who I was, they ran my blood work and it came back clean, no drugs, no alcohol. So that's why they diagnosed me with NALD. But like I said, they're going to treat you like you're an alcoholic anyway. And
when you say that, like they're going to treat you like that, what do you mean by that? Like, what does that look like?
If you are going to apply for a liver transplant, they're going to make you do 6 months, or make you do 3 months of rehab and make you do 6 months of AA.
Okay.
That's like a prerequisite.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so when I was at my worst, or getting close to the time of dying, there was this doctor at Evergreen Hospital who said, "Hey, I have a friend over at UW. Next time you need to come to the hospital, call 911 and have them take you to UW instead." And when I went there, they asked me, "Have you done 6 months of rehab? Have you done or did you go to rehab and have you done 6 months of AA?" And I'm like, "No, how am I supposed to do that when I'm in the hospital half the time?"
Yeah, and the other half of the time you're stuck in your chair, and just to stand up is like you running a marathon.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I was there for 11 days, and they didn't even have their liver team look at me. And then they sent me home. And that was when I gave up and said, "I'm done fighting. I guess I'm gonna die." I had totally forgotten that Swedish had a transplant program.
You felt like that was your last chance.
Correct. One thing I will say about Swedish is if you're going to go to UW, you have to be like the perfect patient in order for them to approve you. Swedish, they understand that humans are humans and humans make mistakes and humans don't get everything they need to get done.
Like we're all sinners.
Yeah, and they understand that. So I did learn while I was at Swedish, they do take a lot of people that UW turns down. Which I'm grateful that Swedish started their liver program, because it's only been around like 2 years.
Wow.
And it just happened to start a few months before I got sick.
There's a lot of serendipity and a lot of your stories about everything that happened, like how everything just
lined up.
Yep.
Yeah. So many things had to fall into place at the right time in order for me to be here. But yeah, so definitely alcohol is the fastest way. Alcohol and being fat are the fastest way to have liver failure. I wish that, and I really hope that in the future, I found out that doctors, like your standard MDs, they get like 4 hours of training on addiction and alcoholism. So when people go in and they're having these issues, they don't have an answer for them. I feel like like you said, knowledge is power. If regular doctors knew how to have the talks with these people and knew what to say to let them know that, hey, you're on the fast track to liver failure.
Yeah, this is making me remember, because you first found out that you had some sort of liver condition when you were fairly young, correct?
Liver condition?
Not a liver condition, but I remember they used telling me when you were relatively young, you had gone to a doctor and they said that you had a fatty liver.
Oh,
like
yeah,
very
yeah.
offhandedly.
Yeah, when I was 20, I think I was either 23 or 25, I don't remember. Yeah, I went to the doctor. I was still in pretty good shape. And the doctor goes, "Oh, yeah, you have fatty liver." And I said, "What does that mean? My liver's fat?" And he goes, "Yeah, basically." And then he just moved on.
Right, and the reason I bring that up, right, is like if that doctor had more information or at least shared more information with you, maybe 24, 25-year-old Jesse would have made different choices.
Correct. Yeah, I would have knew that what path I was heading down. Whether that would have made a difference, who knows? Because I think a big thing that can help people is therapy. When you are hurting mentally and emotionally, a lot of people turn to self-medicating. And that is also a fast track to organ failure. So when I got sick, the doctors said in 2020, when they did diagnose me with NALD, non-alcoholic liver disease, they said, I told them about my 2 years of heavy drinking. And they said, doesn't matter. They said, there is no way that 2 years, no matter how much you drink, if it was a 2-year span, yeah, there's no way it could cause the amount of damage that we see on your liver. It had to be something else. Obviously, the alcohol didn't help, but they said that's not the deciding factor. And then when I came back, so if they do diagnose you with fatty liver, liver disease, any of those, you need to cut back on your salt. 1,200 milligrams of salt a day, which will make all your food taste bland. You get used to Mrs. Dash or whatever that brand of seasoning is. Lose weight, obviously, and avoid drinking. They told me to do that, and I did. And when you're sick, they give you a MELD score when you have liver disease. I forget what tests they run, and then they combine the score to give you a MELD disease. If you have between 28 and 30, that's time for a transplant. When I got to the hospital in 2020, I believe it was a 27. So they said borderline transplant time.
Yeah.
But they said do these 3 things, and there's a chance your liver could hang on for the rest of your life. So I did, and they ran my blood work a year later in 2021, and my MELD score had dropped to a 13. Normal livers are between 8 and 10. So they said, you're almost back to normal.
Through your own effort, right?
Yeah.
Like you weren't putting on any medications, you didn't go under any surgeries, like just through diet, not drinking, taking better care of yourself, you were able to reduce your MELD score by like 50%.
Correct. Yeah, so that's where I was sitting. And who knows, it could have been going down more, I don't know. But that's when I caught COVID in January of 2022. And that's when my liver just tanked.
Yeah.
And the doctors told me that they have had an influx of people who have pre-existing organ conditions catching COVID and their organs failing completely. So they think that COVID was the nail in the coffin. But they still treat you like alcohol was the issue.
Even though at this point you hadn't been drinking for how long?
2 years.
2 years.
And then even after, I started going to the hospital, by the time I got my approved for transplant, I had been sober. Oh, I did drink not knowing. I was in a very uncomfortable situation. not knowing how bad my liver was doing. I did drink. I went on vacation with my ex-girlfriend to Texas to meet her dad and his side of the family, and her dad owned a restaurant bar, and I was very uncomfortable. My ex-girlfriend is of a different ethnicity, and her whole family hardly speaks English. So I was in another state around a bunch of people I didn't know who were speaking another language, and the first thing her dad does when I meet him is roll me a drink.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very uncomfortable, and I did drink.
Mm-hmm.
And I did drink, I think, every day that week. My stepmom thinks that was the nail in the coffin, was that 1 week of drinking.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, we'll never know.
Yeah.
But that, I think, is part of the reason UW wouldn't look at me,
Mm-hmm.
is because of that 1 week. And then, so after that is when I in May went to the hospital, and then from there started the 15 months of hell. And I obviously didn't drink that whole 15 months. And when I was at Swedish, they still wanted me to do AA meetings virtually through my laptop,
Mm-hmm.
which is fine. But like I said, even if you're diagnosed with NALD, they're still going to treat you like an alcoholic. So they still want you to do AA meetings just in case, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's because after you receive transplant, they don't want you to go back to heavy drinking.
Of course not.
Obviously,
Yeah.
you're getting a second chance at life. So yeah, that year and a half where I drank extremely heavy, it's so easy to slip into that, I realized. And I had friends at the time who, every time I would go over to their house, they had a beer in their hand, or they had a glass of something in their hand,
Mm-hmm.
and they're fine. And they can have one or two drinks and just go to bed. I didn't realize that I was different, and I'd have one or two drinks with them and then go home and drink half fifth,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I think there's a lot of people out there that don't realize how much they're drinking. The liver is an amazing organ. It's the only organ that can regenerate itself, but not if you're drinking every day. Not if you have fatty liver. You're clogging up the veins and the arteries, and I'm not a doctor, but if it's clogged up, it's harder for it to process the toxins. There was something I was going to say. I don't remember, but there is one thing that I think would help a lot of people. I don't understand why more colleges don't teach it, but the liver is also the only organ that you can cut in half, or cut a piece off of it and transplant a piece of live liver from a live human to another human, and within a year that piece will grow into a full liver.
It's incredible.
Yeah, and then the piece that you cut off of the donor, it'll grow back in 2 months back into a full liver. I don't understand why they don't do more live liver transplants, because I know that when I was sick, I had many family members reach out and say, I'll donate half of mine.
Mm-hmm.
But I think UW is the only hospital in Washington that does it.